Hello, sorry. Hello and welcome everyone. Wow, what a crowd here. I'd like to welcome you also on behalf of my fiancée Vera. We're going to talk about anatomy of a modern game design document. First of all, we would like to thank Wargaming for the opportunity of speaking here. It's such a great and awesome event here. We have quite a couple of slides, so there will be only a short Q&A session at the end, I'm afraid, but you can approach us after the talk when we are outside. Just come to us, write us an email. We're also gonna put this whole talk on SlideShare in maybe a week or so. If you know slideshare.net, where you can upload PowerPoint presentations, so you're gonna find it there as well. Just Google for our name or the name of the presentation, and you can get it there as well. Yeah, first a little introduction. So my name is Ralf Adam. I'm in the games industry now for more than 25 years, which makes me pretty old, I'm afraid. Together with my fiancée, we run our own business as freelance consultants in producing, project management, but also game design. I spend half of my time in the industry as an employee, mainly in production as producer, executive producer for companies such as Infogramm and a couple of others, some German companies you may or may have not ever heard of, like Sunflowers, Joe Wood, long gone. But the other half I also spent as a freelance consultant with my own company. I worked for companies such as Gameforge, which is a big European client-based MMO publisher located in Germany. Most recently, I worked for a company named Flair Games, also in Germany, on mobile games. Royal Revolt, you may have heard of, or Dawn of Steel. Bit more about my background, some of my all-time favorite games when I'm getting asked, and you can also tell my age by just the games that all my all-time favorites. It's Jagged Alliance 2, Heroes of Might and Magic, Civilization 2, Diablo 2, Pirates. So I'm a real strategy fan and turn-based fan, turn-based games fan. And other than games, I'm also interested in football, karaoke. I'm a very bad singer, but I sing with passion, so be careful when you ever see me singing or hear me singing. Also interested in golf and other stuff, and now I hand over to my...
Hello everybody, my name is Vera, and as Ralf already said, I'm also working as producer and freelance consultant. Now on the slide there's mentioned Game Corps. This is by German law, as we are not allowed to run a company together, so don't wonder why there's mentioned Game Corps. I've studied business administration and have worked most of my time in the games industry after that for big German publishers, for example Gameforge, or also Travian Games located in Munich, and since this year I'm running together the freelancer job with Ralf. Currently, for example, on the big Red Bull brand for the Red Bull PC game, also VR is involved in that one. And my all-time favorite games are, I spend most of my time in World of Warcraft. I quit with Cataclysm, but overall I have a play time of 260 days in more than 3 years. On the other behalf, I'm a huge strategy game fan, and I played Spellforce. Heroes of Might and Magic is also a favorite one of mine. And as one of my big passions beyond games is cars, of course, everything what is related with car racing games, especially Need for Speed Underground.
This is usually the gear we are wearing when we're doing studio due diligences. No, just kidding here. That was shot at a medieval German fair. Right, so what is the speech all about? We're going to talk about, like it's already named, the anatomy of a game design, meaning different kind of game design types, structures, when you need which kind of game design in which phase in the production, what kind of granularity you need there, how to best format them, how to best write them so that they actually get read by the people that are involved and should read them. We're also going to cover this kind of topic. Okay, these days now it's all about agile development. Do we still need documentation at all? It's all just iterative and we just do. Why do we need to write stuff down? Is that still needed? And we also give you some hints and tips and best practices why we think game designs are still important and the way they should look.
What we will not talk about is about specific design methods, for example brainstorming or project planning, team management, game designer skills at all, and storytelling.
All right, so the first question we have here is why do we still need game design documents? I just mentioned it, and you may have heard things like that here before, like no one reads game design docs anyway, but we're doing agile now, we're iterative, game design docs are too much of a ballast, slowing us down. Design docs are outdated the minute you write them. We cannot commit that early to features at all, so why should we put anything in writing at all? So these are all things we've heard many, many times before, both sides, either when we were producers or when we actually were game designers ourselves. And you know what? In our opinion, most of these kind of things are just lame excuses. So let's take a deeper look into some of these kind of, I'd say, rumors.
So let's start with no one reads design docs anyways. Overall, this is not the fault of the documentation per se, but it is rather something which shows that probably your documentation is kind of poor. What do we mean with poor? This also means long prose text, bad formatting, or wrong tools. Ralf will talk later about tools in a little bit more detail. Not keeping the docs alive. This is something we will see a lot of times. People are writing a game design doc once, and during the development phase they will not be updated. So they're outdated and no one wants to read them anymore. Also, an example is insignificant information or relevant information is even hard to find within all the outdated old docs.
Next kind of thing we hear a lot, we cannot commit that early to features. So people just run into production and start producing stuff and say, yeah, well, we're still not sure whether this feature actually will make it into the game or whether it's fun or not. But if you don't know your features, let's say by the end of pre-production, when do you know them at all? So we fully agree, and we see that even more in the later slides. Things change. So if you write something down and you put it into real life, you design something and then you put it into a prototype, you will see that you need to change something. But still, that doesn't mean that you should not document in the first place. Another important thing is most of you guys, unless you're a small indie developer, will work with publishers sooner or later. And I tell you what, the publisher will not accept that you won't document anything, because he will give you money, and obviously he wants to know what he gets for the money. So if you don't commit to something, why should he give you millions of dollars? Another thing, this kind of, I call it the urban legend or rumor, is we're doing agile now, and agile doesn't need any kind of documentation. I put in a quote here from actually the Agile Alliance org. That's the Scrum website, and it says backlog. A backlog is a list of features or technical tasks which the team maintains and which at any given moment are known to be necessary and sufficient to complete a project or a release. And I tell you what, this is the exact description of a game design document. This is what design does, what documentation does. So we get back to that later a little more on how to deal with agile development and documentation, but actually it's already in here. So another thing we should quickly take a look at is for whom you design, because there are a lot of stakeholders involved.
So first of all, you create the game design document for yourself, for your internal game development team. So especially for the programmers, because they have to take everything into code. Then also for your co-designers, level designers, the artists who have to create the graphic and the audio fitting to the game design document, and the QA team. On the other hand, as Ralf already said, if you're working with a publisher, sooner or later you will have to deal with producers from the publisher side, the marketing people, sales, and everybody wants to know the game design document, because they will take the essentials from the game design document about the game. But it's also important to brief outsourcing houses or external QA team, or even sometimes people from the media who wants to know what is your core USP for this game, and this should also be mentioned in the game design document.
So the ultimate goals why you should have a game design document is that it's about sharing a vision. So you can have prototypes and everything, but sometimes that is not enough. Sometimes you as a designer need to put down in writing what you mean with that, what the overall goal mean. A prototype can only be a small glimpse of something, but how will many prototypes be linked together to each other to make a greater game? All these things you need to write down so that everyone internally, as Vera said, and externally has the same vision. I mean, I've even as a freelancer worked once for a publisher where he was thinking he would get a dating simulation, and seriously, the team was actually working on a porn game. And as there was no writing involved or anything, until the very last stage, until the beta arrived at the publisher was not even aware of what he was paying for. So that was a big mismatch. It's also the foundation for all the other documents you will create mainly, and again, it's about being about the publisher who's giving you the budget. How can you estimate the workload, and with the workload that means in the end your resources, the time, and ultimately the budget, if you not have put thoughts in writing in what you actually want to achieve. Furthermore, you might also have internally, and definitely the publisher will have a QA department. So all the test plans, the QA guys, they need that kind of in writing. What is this feature supposed to do? Otherwise they cannot say it's doing how it's designed or it's not doing. They will put in bugs into your database because they think it's broken, but ultimately it's the way you designed it. Again, it's also, I have not worked in any publisher-developer relation where not ultimately it was kind of somewhere said in the contract that whatever in the design is the thing that you have to deliver as a developer, and it's bound to the contract. So it's kind of an amendment to your actually agreement with the publisher. So if you don't have something in writing, it's bad for you because you don't have any protection. This is also for the next point, the change requests. Like I said before, if you design something, there will be changes. But if you agree with a publisher at a certain stage, this is what we're going to deliver, this is what we agree to in the contract, and this is the budget, and then changes pop up, you can say, especially when the changes come from the publisher, sure, we can implement that, but it's not what we originally agreed to, so we need more time, and obviously we also need more money. If you just have a vague idea, the publisher will come up with all of cool change requests and things he would like to see in the game as well, or he was even expecting, and then you're always in this constant argument like, but this is not what we had in mind. But if you don't put into writing what you had in mind, how can you protect yourself from, and sometimes even stupid change requests from the publisher? So let's dive deeper into it, and first of all look into the different stages of documentation. When do you have what kind of design document in production? So you see here we made a kind of a life cycle of a typical game production. If you're doing mobile, it would not be beta, but maybe soft launch 1, soft launch 2. Nevertheless, it's in the end it's the same. You have a pitching phase where you go to the publisher and hopefully get some money, or to investors or whatever. Then you have a pre-production phase, and you have a production phase, and then you have either alpha, beta, soft launch, whatever, kind of a pre-release phase, and then you release the game. And as you can see, there are 5 different stages within this production cycle, which is a vision statement, a high concept, a game design document, as we call it, a product breakdown structure, and a detailed production document. And we now take a closer look of which one is which.
Let's start with the vision statement. The vision statement will be created very early during the pitching phase, and the overall goal is to create a common vision within your development team. So it's first of all for you, that everybody in your team is sharing the vision of the game. And of course it should also be the foundation for all further documents you are creating based on this vision. And a very, very important point is that you will check all future design ideas. Is this fitting to the vision statement? So is every idea I'm having really matching the vision, the overall vision of the game I would like to create, or probably does it not? And the next one, it should always be on the first page of your game design document, that you can find it very, very easy and have always access to it. And it preserves the core essentials idea of the game. So how long should the vision statement overall be? So it's not about having a big prose text, it's a maximum of 1 to 2 pages And you should start with the X in mind. The X is the term from EA, and it's called experience. And as you see, can you see in the small example, for example, for Project Gotham, it's not about how fast you can drive, it's about driving fast. And it's the summary of the core gameplay you have in mind. And it's filled with primary and secondary gameplay elements. As I already said, you start with a vision statement very early at the beginning of the pitching phase, and it's for your complete dev team. Short example here from Ensemble Studios, who created Age of Empires. This is only a small piece out of the vision doc, but it gives you a good overview what it is about. A history-themed real-time strategy game for the PC that presents the rise of the first civilization on Earth by combining an RTS gameplay from Warcraft 2 with the historical and economical features of civilization.
So once you have this vision statement, once you have that, you create the next document. That might be more familiar even if you have not heard of a vision statement, or maybe you have done that in the past but already integrated into that next document. The next document has many names. You know it as high concept. There are other names like design draft, pitch bible, concept paper, whatever. This is actually the thing you send to the publisher. So if you ever worked with a publisher before, it's this 10 to 20 pages you create where you put in the first set of features you want to have in the game, kind of a rough scope, the USPs, a first definition of the target audience, the genre, maybe some thoughts on the tech, whether you want to go Unreal or whatever, Unity, and this is your main sales tool. So this is why the, like Vera said before, the vision document, the vision statement document is more for your internal use. Based on that, you create the pitch bible, and that one actually goes out then to the publisher. The anatomy, like I said, it's usually 10 to 20 pages. It shouldn't be that long, so no 100 pages or something. Publishers hate to read big documents. It includes the core gameplay elements of your game. Usually something like early in the game you do that, later in the game what you do in the end game, kind of descriptions, some first mock-up visuals. If you don't have mock-up visuals yet, I would really encourage you, there's nothing wrong with that, taking pictures from movies or even references from other games. Usually, especially young teams we meet, they're kind of like, no, we're so innovative and there's no other game that can be compared to ours. First of all, like a Chinese philosopher said, there is nothing new under the sun, so there's always something you can compare to other things. And it's not bad in a way that publishers will think you just rip off other people's ideas. It's more to create a common vision. Okay, this is how generally the style should be. Is it more realistic or more cartoony? Will we go more in the Overwatch direction? You can still point out the things you will make differently, and this is obviously also important because no publisher wants a clone, or most of the publishers don't want. But reference materials always help, and it's good to have them in your documents. Don't shy away from that if you don't have the resources right now yourself. Like I said, it's created usually after the vision statement. So first of all, you need obviously the vision, what kind of game you want to create, and then you flesh it more out. And like I said, this one is mostly for the publishers. It's also obviously for your internal team, so your dev team should know about the game you want to create, obviously as well, but this is your sales bible. So then we get to the next phase, and this is maybe the more important and more interesting one. This is the game design document, and as you can see, this is created during the pre-production. So the goal of the game design document that you create during the pre-production, and it's very frequently, if you go to Gamasutra or anywhere else, called the GDD, game design document. The goal here is to really describe all main features, the scope of the game, the quality, and the reason why you're doing that is you need to define the game in a way in that document that everyone in your team can estimate his tasks. Otherwise, like I said before, you will not be able to discuss with a publisher or negotiate a certain budget, because he will tell you rightfully, okay, you want 3 million and you have 1 or 2 sentences of what you want to build. How can you be sure that it's 3 million and not just 1 or maybe 10 or whatever? So you really need to write down the scope, all features, everything in a level of granularity that you can estimate the task. That means, on the other hand, you will not go fine-tooth detail into kind of like formulas, balancing sheets. If you're doing an RTS, you might say we'll have that many kind of races, that many kind of units, but you will probably not define already in the game design document the cavalry will ride on unicorns or something like that. That is really for later. So this one is really that you have something where your artists can rate the asset lists, where the coders can estimate all the tasks, the level designers, the game designers. This is the level of granularity. Unfortunately, every game is different, so there is not kind of a holy grail where you could say this is the template for that, or it should always have 200 pages or 400 or 50 pages, because it heavily depends on the game, obviously, that you're trying to build, whether you're making a small game or a big MMO game or whatever. But generally the idea behind, again, is you will know when you read it, everyone in the team understands what it is that is supposed to be created, and everyone in the team can say, okay, at least on a, let's say, week man basis, this is probably a feature that's going to cost me 4 weeks or 2 weeks or a day or something. And like I said, like it's stated here, it should be as big as needed, but also not bigger. So it's not about creating a huge document and writing long prose text. This is not what a GDD is about. So yeah, here you have a little more overview on what I just already said. So all relevant game features, definition of scope and quality, especially also the definition of quality is very important in the GDD, that you say for all features, kind of like, what's the ambition of that feature? Is it like this feature is going to kick ass and it will be the most innovative thing and no one has done before? This feature we're gonna just do as as all the other competition. Just be precise so that the publisher, but also everyone in your team, knows about the scope and the kind of level of quality you're trying to achieve with each feature and each thing you want to implement. Obviously, at the end of the game design phase, you should have an art style guide. Do we go, again, realistic or fantasy or cartoony, whatever, level world documents, all that kind of stuff. You should have a first menu flow, click dummies and stuff like that. We're going to take a look later into that, how these could look. If you're doing a free-to-play game, obviously this is also another time to define what's our core monetization strategy. Do we mostly do in-app purchases, or do we have other kinds of things we want to sell in the game, or do we have energy mechanics, whatever. And like I said before, it's usually not to the level where you say not only let's take monetization, we're going to have in-app purchases. You definitely will not define already at the end of pre-production how much each item costs or stuff like that. This is really for later. So like I said, it's created during the whole pre-production until close to the end, not to the very end, because you still need to do the estimations in the end of pre-production to get to an agreement with the publisher what the budget will be. And the target audience is everyone in the dev team, as I had explained, because everyone needs to be involved and make his estimations or work on it, and for the publisher, because ultimately that's what he's going to agree to and is going to buy. And then we have an additional tool that's also helping you in the creation of that game design document.
And this is the product breakdown structure. What is the product breakdown structure? It's an overview map, often created in a mind manager, who helps you to figure out all features and assets needed for the game. When you're working with agile terms or kind of scrummish ways, it can be an overview of all epics founded in your game design document. And it's the foundation for further planning and estimations, and helps you also within the team to prioritize the feature set. The anatomy of the product breakdown structure will be usually, as I said, in a kind of mind map style. It shows the features, the assets, and the technology. So it's not only about the game design itself, it's also about the features and the technology needed from the graphical perspective. There are also no tasks included already in the product breakdown structure, and it's no detailed description. It's only to give you a brief overview about the main parts of your game design document, and no resources are allocated or dependencies, so it's not a kind of project management tool. You create it parallel with the game design document during the pre-production. It's extremely helpful when you start with brainstorming on game design ideas, and it will be finished together at the end of pre-production together with a GDZ. And the target audience for this one is primarily the game design, the project management and product owner within your product team, because it's also very, very helpful for the later on estimations. Now we have a short example how this could look like. You see in the middle it's kind of mind mapping tool. You see your project, which is split up in technology, features, and the assets, and then you have really kind of a small breakdown from the high-level parts into smaller parts, like level design, what is needed there, different item types, scoring, or on the technical side, which tools are you planning to use, is it a 3D pipeline, and this is the structure base for the product breakdown.
And last but not least, that's what we call, and there are also many different names, I would call it the detailed production documents. And as you can see, you produce them throughout the whole production period until the very last, and maybe even if you're in beta or alpha stage or in soft launch and things will change, you obviously document there as well. But this shows you again that you're not making a game design at the pre-production and never touch it again. But you really need to go more into the details later once you're in production. And like I said before, this is now really fine-tuned granularity and detail, and that's why you're not produce all of that up front, but really for the next milestone or for the next 1-2 sprints, if you're in agile, whatever, you define in detail. In agile it's called user stories. Actually, once again, they have different names, but it's the same meaning. So really about on a granularity level of I as a user can click on that button, I get into the game, I do this, I do that. We'll see some more examples later how this could look like. And you only create that upfront for the next milestone, for the next thing you build, and then obviously you implement it, check it out, and then if it works, fine, you continue. If not, you need to reiterate on that. And this is this constant process of documenting something, building something, documenting something, building something that goes throughout the whole production cycle. Like I said also before, this is also very important for your QA people to define the definition of done. So you cannot give something to QA like, this is the prototype, check it out. They will ask you, what is it supposed to do and how can we check whether it's good or not? So you need to give them something, and by the way, this is what we try to achieve with that. So this is what you're using this detailed design documentation for as well. It can look like that, and again, everything we say here is like, these are best practices, but every team is individual, every game is individual. So pick out all the gems you find here useful for your team and change whatever you think might work better. But one anatomy could look like, no, sorry, can we go back to the... So every feature needs to have a priority. So is it a must-have feature, should-have feature, nice-to-have feature? The feature ambition I've mentioned before, is it something which is a simple feature that is like in any other game? Do we try to make a feature that might be in other games, but we just want to make it better? Do we might try to reinvent something and make it completely alternative or even innovative? It gives a general overview of the feature, this spec document, and then it has a detailed description of the feature implementation, ideally in bullet points. We have some more examples to come. It should also include some kind of designer's note. So the implementation description is really for the coders, like, okay, this is what it should do, but maybe you should also, as a designer, want to add something like, I did that in a way because I like that particular thing in another game, or I don't know, I got up this morning and the weather was bad and I thought that was a good idea, whatever. You can put that in the designer's note, but never put it into the implementation. The implementation should be a lean description of how it should be implemented by a code, by art, whatever. And if you want to have some further kind of information, put that into a designer's note. If you already, when you're writing that doc, realize it might be risky for some reasons, or there might be some things you're not sure yet how to implement, put it into a special risk kind of section. And last but not least, what is really important is the change history. And this is one of the reasons why you should also always document. You design something, you implement something, and it's great, cool. You design something, you implement, it's not working for whatever reason, so you change it. or the publisher comes up with like, I want these additional stuff, or I have a better idea, or whatever, and you start discussing why it's a good idea or not, you will either come to an agreement that a change is needed and you should change it, put it in there, or you might even come to the agreement, well, we talked about this idea, but it's not a good idea for various reasons, and we do not change the feature. Put it in here as well. First part is, if you agree to change something, like I said before, it's going to affect your budget. So you need to agree with the publisher that you really want to make the change, and the publisher needs to agree that you get budget for that and time and everything. The other thing is, which we discovered quite frequently, if changes pop up and you decide not to do them, and you do not document why you decide not to do them, half a year later, someone comes up with, you know, 6 months ago we had this great idea, why didn't we put it in? And you start discussing again and again and again about something you've already decided because you forgot why you decided not to do it. So that's why a change log is really important and very helpful, especially on long productions. Some of you guys are smiling, so I see you've been there before as well, so yeah, seen that constantly. So like I said, this production document is created throughout the whole process. The target audience really for the production, the detailed production documents, usually first and most of all are the coders, because they are the ones who are now, you know, need to implement it. The game designers, I mean, they wrote it. The artists already have their asset lists and stuff like that, so they should usually on the safe side. But this is really now primarily for the coders. So you should write it in a way that the coders understand it. And again, we'll show you some examples. And also later, like I said before, QA for their test plans. But there, for them, it's also helpful if it's written in a way like the coders also want it. Namely, what is this thing supposed to do in bullet point steps? And the publishers, at least the producer, also usually read the design docs, or at least he should. So now we're getting to the part that I named before, giving you some examples and go into a little more detail of how you write it. Now we know why we write it and what we should write and when, and now we take a look in how. So generally, for all documentation you do, keep it short. Keep it as simple and short as possible, but not simpler. I think Einstein said that. So write in bullet points, not in long prose text like once upon a time there was a unicorn in a dark forest, whatever kind of thing. No one is interested in that. Break bigger features into smaller sub-features. Avoid redundancies. So, for example, if you have tables and stuff like that, especially coders love to have tables and balance sheets and everything separate, then make hyperlinks to just, you don't write it again and again in different kind of documents about what this feature is supposed to do, because when you have a change, you need to go in all individual features and, all individual documents and change it there again. So work more with hyperlinks and stuff like that. Create your own template, but then stick to it. So a little example here, how a feature overview, and this is also something, this is kind of the level of granularity you might have in the GDD phase, like I said before. This is enough for coders and for everyone in the team to estimate the tasks, at least on a week man basis. And this is actually from a game design I've written a couple of years ago for a small DS title, a kids title. So you see here in this mini game 4 different colored containers are displayed on the top screen. They represent the thousands, hundreds, tens, and ones. A math problem is displayed. Really short, but this is the feature overview. And that is kind of the detailed then description of the feature implementation. And again, this one is written in a way, the player, this is like if you learn about how in agile development user stories are written, you can either write I as a player see that, I as a player can do that, or you just write the player, or you just write I, but always stick to one kind of template. But in that example here, I don't know whether everyone can read it, but just give you some brief examples. In order to get the correct sphere in the correct container, the player has to point on the selected sphere and hold the stylus pressed. Stylus, it was a DS game, like I said. The sphere is now connected to the stylus and lifted over the conveyor belt. The player has to move it under the right container and flick it so it flies into the container in the top screen of the DS, and so on. So this is really the level of granularity and the style in bullet points that a coder will understand and can start implementing it. Some call this, also if you Google it, pseudocode. It can even go down one level further, but for me this had worked out pretty well in the past. Also, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So whatever you can visualize rather visualize than obviously write it. Make mock-ups. I usually use a lot of PowerPoint. PowerPoint is a great tool for actually creating easy mock-ups or even kind of visual prototypes, click dummies, stuff like that. Once again, never shy away from using references from other games or films. It's way easier to say this particular user behavior or this particular click behavior or the way you control it should be like in that game, only more smooth or whatever. There's nothing wrong with that. But be careful, on the other hand, don't do other people's job. So don't start to write real code, obviously, in here. Don't start to really create real UI workflows or you become the UI artist and make everything shiny, because you have your experts for that in your team. So here you see a little example. The left one I created, this was really with PowerPoint, just to visualize what I've just explained, this kind of mini game where you need to flick these spheres into the upper kind of tubes. And actually the game design team then came up with the great idea of having these horseshoes and making it a horseshoe game. But this really shows you how it could look like. Or also when you're describing menu flows, don't definitely get away from trying to describe a menu flow in a prose text. Use something like Visio or other tools to really just make these kind of menu flows, they work way better. Or this is a typical kind of mock-up for a click dummy, how a screen should look like. So this is not how the screen should actually look like, but only the information that should be on the screen. Once again, where it will be placed finally and how it really look like in terms of how the buttons, the colors and everything is, you have experts for that. For you, it's just important to visualize to the team what should be in there.
What we also see a lot is that sometimes the game design document itself is not precise enough. So what happens, you have to say, yes, this is the fact, this is what we want to create, and sometimes you get a game design document where you have a lot of terms like maybe, potentially, it could be that, it might have this and that included in the feature. So what we really want to recommend, be precise as much as possible and say, yes, the feature will have this 3 or 5 things, and avoid terms like maybe or shall. Also very important, if you create a design doc, especially for your team members, avoid to have abbreviations. So damage over time or area of effects, this is with an abbreviation, not everything the people will know in your team.
And like I said before, always keep in mind, yes, what you write down will change again, but there's nothing wrong with that. There's still, and hopefully we're already giving you some good reasons to document. So just be aware that you need to constantly update that thing. So like I said before, the change history or the change log is a good tool for doing something like that. And only if you document these changes, you can then again request more budget from the publisher, because you can prove him, look, we originally agreed to that kind of feature spec, it didn't work out, so we need to change it, or you had some cool ideas we want to implement, but these changes cost time and obviously cost money ultimately. To do so, don't be old school, because we still, and this is like 2016, but we still stumble across teams that use kind of a Word doc to write their design document. The problem with Word doc is, and you may have encountered that in the past, if you constantly update the Word doc, you need to send it around via email or whatsoever, and then everyone has a different version of the Word document, and suddenly you start discussing about and say, but wait a second, we changed that 2 weeks ago, and the other coder might say, but I was not on that email, or I haven't read the email, or I didn't get the latest doc or whatever. Or with the publisher, to stay in sync, it's important to have online tools. Use something like Google Docs, like Wiki, like Confluence, all that kind of stuff. Or if you're really still working with Word docs, put them under version control. Put them into your whatever you're using, Perforce or something, that there's always only one instance of the updated version of the doc. Let's take a quick look into the so what about this agile development thing again? Most of that I already mentioned. First of all, agile development is not something new. game development has always been agile. Here's a nice quote from the guy who did Missile Command back on the Atari days. Pick an idea, write up a game proposal, get it okayed by management, take a couple of weeks to bring it up a playable, simple version. Management reviews that and okays it or exit. If okayed, continue with the whole game. Regular reviews by management to make sure it's still fun. Kill the game if not. And this is from 1980. So you see, that is not new. And also this whole Scrum and other agile development, it's not new, and it's not, we don't need documents anymore. You still have a description of all the specs, aka the backlog. You focus on iteration and fast implementation, but again, this is something, I'm in the industry for 25 years. We never did anything differently 25 years ago. Some terms might have changed. Again, having this kind of ideas, you're doing the epics first, which is like the GDD, and then you write the detailed user stories, which is kind of the detailed design documentation throughout the production. All of these things are not really new inventions, and there are also no excuses for not documenting or for not writing game designs anymore. Some things to keep in mind, especially when working with something like Scrum, a backlog is usually just a list of all your epics or all your user stories or the whole content, but it doesn't have a clear structure or paragraphs or stuff like that. So that might be tricky for someone outside, especially to read it or to get a full understanding. So sometimes you might have, or you may want to implement kind of hyperlinks and stuff like that into your user stories to make them easier to understand. Also, if you want to maintain both, if you have a design document and create user stories out of that, make sure they're always in sync, which is kind of a little of overhead. And last but not least, important question, who's the product owner if you have, or if you're working in an agile development kind of environment? We always had discussions when working with teams. Is it now the publisher? Is it the producer, the game designer? Who prioritize? Who owns actually the backlog? There might be different solutions. Again, there's no holy grail, but just make sure you define that up front. Now, finally, some best practices.
What we have seen in the past, what is very helpful for your full design team, is designing by play sessions. So sit together within your team once a week, play what you have already implemented and review it and say, is it what we want to have or is it not? Don't be afraid of critical comments within your team members, because it helps to keep everybody in your team committed to the project, and also gets outside feedback from later on focus group testing, friends and family playables and other testing groups.
Another thing, don't be afraid to cut. It's cool to implement features, but if you see they don't work, especially unfortunately in Germany, there's this tendency, what I call German game design dog. If a German game designer implements a feature and it doesn't work, he implements 2 more features to support the broken feature. That's why German games tend to be very broad, but not very polished into the depth. While most American designers, if you look at the design document or at a game like Diablo, it just has a very small feature set, but it's polished into a level of detail and depth that's amazing, and that makes this kind of game experience. So never be afraid of cutting a feature. This might sometimes also end up in arguments with your publishers, but convince him, yes, you paid for that feature, but if we both agree it doesn't work, why should we have it in the game? Because it's breaking the game actually, so it's not helping, it's hurting. I said that before, change is coming, brace yourself. So once again, make sure you design, but also make sure your design documents get updated, and change is nothing bad, but something good. But just make sure if you do changes, it's always in accordance with your publisher, because also on the other hand, I've always kind of put the publisher in a bad light, saying he comes up with stupid ideas and you're forced to implement it, so make sure you get the money. On the other hand, if you have ideas, no matter if stupid or great, talk to your publisher, because you cannot just change things and then afterwards go to the publisher, look, the budget has increased because we did some changes, and the publisher is like, yeah, but I did not agree to it, how can you just change something without consulting me? And then he might not give you, rightfully in that case, the money for that change. Another thing, I said that before, visualization helps you a lot. There is a technique that's called story mapping, and there's a link here, so you might just, if I send you, or if you download this PowerPoint later, I can really recommend to click on the link and read it in full detail, but here's an example of what story mapping mean. Story mapping mean, and if you've written game design documents in the past, you may know this kind of, you explain the user experience from a user workflow. Like in the early gameplay, I as a user go into the game, I have 3 kind of units, I start building the first buildings, blah, blah, blah. You can do the same just by story mapping that out with post-its. So actually what you do is you visualize what you write into post-its, like I get into the game, it's the first post-it. I click on, or I have my first 3 units, it's the next post-it, and so on. And you can create these kind of user flows that help you visualizing what you actually do in the game. And from that, you can very easily get your menu flow right. You can give this also to the QA. It will help them for creating the test plans. It gives you actually an overview of the scope. Sometimes if you write something, you just say, but it's just a couple of paragraphs. But if you put it into something like that, you'll see how many individual tasks may be related to that thing, and that might sometimes be kind of like a reality check that feature might be out of scope or too big, and you might streamline it further. And this is the very last point. Some more tools I really recommend. Some of them I've mentioned already. Mind mapping tools as Xmind or Mind Manager. Trello, especially if you're working more agile, but also I encountered in the past that for artists, Trello is a perfect tool for managing all the asset flow. If you don't know Trello, it's like a Kanban board. So you have different steps like should be designed, in design, ready for production, and so on. And many teams I know do that with post-its, which is also fine, but if you also want to have a digital kind of version, Trello is a very cool tool for that. I've mentioned Visio, PowerPoint before, other tools like Balsamic or Pencil for wireframing and UI kind of workflows. Wiki I've mentioned before, and Google Docs maybe also a great tool a lot of people using. It keeps your docs up to date, and it's very cool for balancing, especially for having kind of live balancing sheets that you can change, and then the game automatically and live changes. On the other hand, for game design itself, there is one flaw with Google Docs. It doesn't give you a good overview like Confluence or something like that. As you can see here, this is a typical kind of glimpse into a game design, but it's not really telling you something about the structure or where you can actually find stuff. So for actual game design, I find something like Confluence more convenient. But again, other teams work with Google, but it can get very messy very fast if you just throw documents in folders and don't have a clear folder structure and stuff like that. So maybe to summarize and have kind of like some last minute gems, last slide. We've talked about agile and being iterative and having a lot of prototypes. A general tip is try to be as iterative as possible in pre-production, but once you move into production, get away from being too iterative in terms of if you're still in or if you're already in production and still don't know how features work and say, yeah, we're going to figure that out all later, down the road that might be too late or might kind of let your schedule explode. Also, as said before, try to have as many prototypes as early as possible. So again, most important thing if you're doing design is a prototype, then it's visualization, and in the end it's game design documentation. You should have all of that, but the more prototypes you have, you can show, the less documentation you obviously need to have. Another tip, teams tend to start once they're in production with the feature they think it's the most coolest or they're most crazy about, or maybe it's even the most easiest to implement. I would do it the other way around. Implement the most crucial feature that are the most hard and risky ones, because you don't want to have a bad experience that you say, okay, the most crucial feature we're going to implement right before alpha, and then suddenly it doesn't work out and then you're kind of screwed. So do the risky stuff first when you move into production. Another thing is that goes out to all you game designers, I would really recommend and enforce and encourage you to be the keeper of the vision. Get as many feedback from outside as possible. Everyone might have great ideas, and you as a good game designer also kind of absorb these ideas and turn them into great game design, but ultimately don't let the game design decisions be taken away from you. When the publisher starts designing your game, that's very bad. It's a very bad publisher behavior, and I could only warn any publisher, but also you as a development studio, you're kind of screwed. So in the end, you as the game designer should be the ultimate keeper of the vision, always. And again, like I said, I've mentioned it a couple of times before, more or less in kind of subtitles, but make sure that in your contract it really states when there are changes to an agreed design that affect budget. Once both parties agree to it, you obviously also get the budget from the publisher, because publishers are great with coming up with great ideas and changes all the time, but they usually shy away from giving you more money from that once they agree to a budget. Some reading recommendations: if you download the slide or get the slides from us, you can also give us your business cards afterwards and we send you the slide decks. Here are some further readings I could really strongly recommend: some PowerPoint presentations, Gamma Sutra articles, stuff like that. And that finally, I think we're a bit out of time, unfortunately. I'm very sorry for that. But maybe we can still have a little Q&A session if you have some questions here. Would be very happy to answer them. And thanks for your patience and waiting so long and not going to lunch.
Thank you for your speech. Thank you for your thought about documentation about what not to do. I love this point. What is your suggestion or advice how to document this not to do things? Because in Google Documents it might be, a huge amount of information.
Yeah. Again, that's why I recommend really go into Confluence or something like that, or set up your own wiki or whatever. It should be online, but it should enable you to have a clear structure, and then really work with very small paragraphs. So even if you have a big epic that may result in smaller user stories, give each user story its individual paragraph, maybe in an individual section, so you have kind of like an index that you can read, and then you can click on, okay, this epic is like, okay, we'll have units and an RTS, and there are smaller user stories, what the AI behavior is, and I can really dive into the details from there.